Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple.
In part 1 of this analysis, we focused on Klopp's strange attacking tactics, but now it's time to focus in on what Arteta and Arsenal did in possession throughout the match. So let's take a look at what Arsenal did against Liverpool when in possession. When Arsenal were building up from the goal kick, they looked to drop their centre-backs deep, and Zinchenko could start centrally, but more often looked to start wide, and Liverpool were aggressive in their press. This was through Salah and Gakpo becoming the front two ready to press the centre-backs, whilst the midfield could go fairly man-to-man, looking to protect the centre. At the same time, this would have left Zinchenko as the free option, so what we saw was that Trent was given the freedom to move higher up the pitch, ready to cover, with Konate and Van Dijk shifting across to make it a back three, whilst Henderson could also help to cover these right-hand side regions when Trent was pressing high. So here we see that Salah, Gakpo front two, Trent high, and Henderson from midfield potentially ready to cover in behind Trent. But Liverpool's set defensive shape was a borderline disaster, and Arsenal looked to take advantage almost immediately. Even in controlled play, Klopp looked to keep Salah high as the second forward alongside Gakpo, and Arsenal, as we know, like to build up with the back three. So, despite Salah making this defensive sacrifice and moving central, they were still outnumbered. Not only that, but the aging Henderson, whose legs are not what they used to be, would now have to cover the massive right-hand side space all by himself. But we did see Arsenal also look to invert early with Zinchenko, as we know they love to do, and this created even more problems for Liverpool. This was primarily because it meant they now had a 4 versus 3, and the left-hand side was the side they were looking to punish because of Salah and Henderson's positioning, with almost half of their attacks coming down this flank. So, with Zinchenko having the ball, and Liverpool knowing that he is often the man to dictate, Liverpool had to make the decision, because if Henderson pressed from midfield, Xhaka could simply move higher up the pitch and look to receive between the lines, and now the midfield line had been broken, and Arsenal could look to attack. Here we have one such situation where Henderson is initially covering Xhaka, but now his attention is drawn towards Zinchenko, who is inverted, meaning Xhaka is potentially free between the lines, though Zinchenko opts to go backwards. But what we could also see is that once Henderson had been drawn to Zinchenko, Xhaka was more than happy to move out wide, as that's where the space was, especially with Salah high either pressing holding or Gabriel, meaning that he could be found in this region. So now not only was the aging Henderson having to do two men's job down this right hand side, this now also meant that perhaps their worst defensive player was now 2 versus 1 consistently, with Martinelli making runs beyond, or we even saw Xhaka being willing to overlap early on to get into crossing positions. So here we'll have Salah being drawn towards Gabriel, and Henderson has 2 men to deal with. And in this case, Henderson has to cover Xhaka, who's moved wide, and Gakpo covers, but we could see that Zinchenko would have potentially been free. And these left-hand side overloads could be made even worse, because as we know, Zinchenko is not an immobile forward, so he likes to drop deep, but also pull wide whenever he can. And once again, with Salah high, this would mean that there was now a massive overload down the flanks, so we'd often see Liverpool having to make do and come across to try and even things up, which would of course then facilitate the switch into Saka, who would be 1 versus 1 against Robertson, which is never a position you want your fullback to be in. So here once again, Arsenal's back three means that Salah will be dragged all the way wide to Gabriel. And again, it means that Henderson is having to deal with 2 men, but this time Jesus has also moved wide. So now, Trent is forced high onto Jesus, meaning the entire back line has to shift across, so Jesus can now switch out to Saka, leading to a potential 2 versus 1 in this case. However, because Arsenal went ahead so early, their main concern was hitting on the transition, which we focused on in part 1, which is already on the channel, so you can check that out. But for the manager tactical score, this was one of the most high stakes, highly entertaining matches of the season, and both managers must be commended for going for it. Arsenal could have been well out of sight before Liverpool pulled it back, but in the end, Klopp earns a 6.5 for piling on the pressure and finding a solution to Arsenal's defensive structure. But the Gunners were extremely passive after going ahead and probably should have conceded a lot more, meaning Arteta earns just a 5. But what are your thoughts? Drop them down below.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you might enjoy the content available on my Patreon.
Not only does Patreon help to support the continued production of content, as I am a one-man team, but it also gives you early access to videos that will come on the channel. You'll also get exclusive videos, get to vote on polls, and so much more. And it's cheaper than ever, no longer having a tier system, so everyone on the Patreon gets access to all the content. So head over to patreon.com/footballmadesimple to check it out.
But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.